It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but when Layla stepped into the small side hallway of the church to fix her veil, her heart stopped at the sight through the slightly ajar door. Her fiancé, Nolan, stood with his back to her, lips pressed against a bridesmaid in a wine-colored dress. The same one she had picked for her best friend, Olivia. But it wasn't Olivia. It was Bree, the girl Nolan had once sworn he couldn't stand. The kiss was too familiar, too deep, too practiced to be a mistake, and Layla froze, veil slipping from her hand, bouquet clattering to the floor in slow motion. Neither of them noticed her standing there, breath held like glass about to shatter. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Instead, she backed away like a ghost, her white dress catching the morning light as if nothing had happened at all. Inside her chest, though, 1,000 truths detonated at once. Nolan had begged to move the wedding up, said he couldn't wait any longer, said she was the only thing that made sense in his life. All while hiding this. Layla walked back to the bridal suite in a trance, the smile on her face mechanical as the makeup artist powdered her cheekbones. "Cold feet?" someone joked. She didn't answer. Her mind spun back to the pink stick she'd found in his car weeks ago, the perfume that wasn't hers, the strange excuses about late meetings. She'd swallowed every doubt because she loved him, and because she had a secret of her own, one she had planned to reveal gently, lovingly, after the vows were spoken. But now, that secret felt like a weapon. Her hand drifted to her stomach, still flat, still quiet, but unmistakably carrying the beginning of a life. A baby Nolan didn't know about. A baby he didn't deserve to know. Outside the church, guests were arriving, dressed in smiles and expectation, carrying gifts and cameras, and the illusion that today was still about joy. Layla's mother flitted in, fussing over her dress, oblivious to the war behind her daughter's eyes. "You look like an angel," she whispered. Layla forced a thank you, her fingers curling around the edge of the vanity to stay upright. She had two choices: bury the pain and go through with it, or step into the light and burn the fairy tale down. But she wouldn't burn it just for revenge. She would burn it for clarity, for dignity, for the tiny heartbeat now pulsing quietly inside her. She would not raise her child in a lie. And so, with a strange sense of calm, Layla stood, adjusted her dress, and walked toward the altar. Not to say, "I do," but to make the most honest speech of her life. The organ music swelled as the church doors opened and everyone rose to their feet. Layla walked slowly, bouquet steady in her hands, face unreadable behind the delicate veil. Each step echoed down the aisle like a drumbeat of war. Nolan stood at the altar, nervously adjusting his tie, eyes searching hers for comfort. Yet all he met was glass. She stopped just short of him, and the pastor's voice rang out, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." But Layla lifted her hand gently, halting the ceremony before it could breathe. A hush swept over the pews. Nolan tilted his head, confused, trying to mask the flicker of guilt that sparked across his brow. Layla's veil came down slowly. She turned to the guests and smiled. Only it wasn't joy. It was the kind of smile that's carved from survival. "Before we begin," she said, voice steady but soft, "I'd like to say something." Murmurs rippled. The pastor nodded hesitantly, stepping aside. Nolan took a half step toward her but froze when she raised her eyes to his. "I want to thank everyone for coming. It means the world that you all showed up today. I know weddings are about love, truth, and promises." Her gaze swept the room, then landed back on Nolan. "Which is why I can't marry someone who already broke all three." Gasps erupted from the front pew. Nolan's jaw dropped, color draining from his face. "Layla, what are you—" "I saw you," she cut in, voice calm but final. In the hallway, with Bree, just moments ago. Bree, seated in the third row, went pale, hands trembling in her lap. The whispers turned louder now, confusion and scandal unraveling like a bolt of silk down the pews. Nolan stepped forward. It didn't mean anything. Please, let's just talk. But Layla shook her head. There's nothing to talk about. Except this. She turned to her mother and reached for a small envelope tucked into the bouquet's satin wrap. She held it up. I was going to give this to you, Nolan, after the wedding. A surprise. But now, I think the surprise belongs to everyone. She handed the envelope to the pastor, who hesitated, then opened it and read the paper inside. Slowly, then looked up at Layla, stunned. It's a prenatal ultrasound, Layla said quietly. I'm 12 weeks pregnant. The silence in the church was crushing. Nolan stumbled back like he'd been punched. You're pregnant? Layla nodded. I was going to build a life with you. I wanted our child to grow up with both parents, with truth. But you've shown me who you are, and our baby will never have to wonder. The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were frozen. Bree stood abruptly and ran out of the church, face buried in her hands. Nolan reached for Layla's hand. I made a mistake, one stupid mistake. No, she said, stepping back. You made a choice, and now I'm making mine. She turned, handed her bouquet to her mother, and walked down the aisle the way she came in, slowly, powerfully, every eye glued to her. Some in awe, some in tears, but all changed. As she reached the doors, the light from outside wrapped around her like freedom dressed in silk. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She simply opened the door and walked into the beginning of her real story. Outside the church, the sun hit Layla's face like a spotlight, but it didn't burn. It baptized. She didn't pause to look back, not even once. Every step felt like shedding an old skin, one woven with lies, betrayal, and the pressure to perform love she no longer recognized. A breeze caught her veil and carried it down the church steps, where it fluttered into the gutter like a silk ghost. She didn't chase it. She let it go. The guests remained trapped inside that building like spectators in a paused theater, mouths open, hearts pounding, unsure if what they'd just witnessed was bravery or breakdown. Layla kept walking until her heels clicked against the concrete outside the church parking lot. Her cousin Tessa caught up with her, face flushed with worry. Layla, do you want me to drive you somewhere? Layla glanced at her, took a breath, and said softly, No. I think I need to walk a little first. Tessa didn't push. She just nodded, handed Layla a pair of flats she'd been carrying, just in case, and stepped back. The minute Layla's feet touched the ground in real shoes, not heels designed for illusion, something shifted. She began walking, slowly at first, then faster, her hands wrapped around her middle where her child grew, innocent, silent, and unaware of the earthquake it had already survived. She walked past shops, stunned passers-by, and the kind barista who blinked twice before realizing she was still in a wedding dress. Eventually, she found herself in front of a bookstore with a dusty corner reading Nook. A bell jingled as she stepped in. The clerk gave her a stunned look, but Layla just smiled faintly and asked, Do you have anything on single motherhood? The woman blinked, then led her to the back without a word. Layla ran her fingers along the spines of the books like she was touching new possibilities. No one here knew her name. No one knew Nolan. No one saw a jilted bride. They saw a woman in white making her own path. As she flipped through a dog-eared copy of What to Expect, a man nearby glanced at her and said softly, You okay?" She looked up. He was maybe in his early 40s, kind eyes, wearing a suit that didn't match the bookstore's casual vibe. "I'm getting there," she replied. "You look like you just ran out of a wedding," he said, half smiling. "I did." He paused, then said something strange. "Good." She laughed for the first time in days. "What makes you say that?" He shrugged. "Sometimes the bravest thing isn't saying yes, it's knowing when to walk away." She nodded, and they talked for a moment longer, about nothing and everything. He didn't flirt. He didn't ask her name. He just saw her. And in that quiet recognition, Layla felt more human than she had in months. As she left the bookstore, book in hand, heart slightly lighter, she looked up at the sky. No ring on her finger, no weight on her chest, just a flutter beneath her ribs reminding her that she was still whole. Still beginning. The woman who walked into that church had been silenced by doubt. But the woman walking away was narrating a story entirely her own. And her next chapter hadn't even started yet. By morning, Layla's name wasn't just whispered. It was headline material. Someone had filmed the entire wedding revelation on their phone and uploaded it online. Bride exposes groom's affair and drops pregnancy bomb at the altar had over 2 million views by sunrise. Layla's phone buzzed non-stop with messages, missed calls, and media inquiries. She turned it off. She wasn't ready to become a symbol or a scandal. All she wanted was air and silence. But the world had other plans. Her mother showed up at her apartment door with 3 bags of groceries, a scowl on her face, and tears in her eyes. "You should have told me," she said softly, holding her daughter's face in her hands. "You never had to go through that alone." Layla hugged her tightly, letting the pain break through her chest in one quiet sob. "I thought I had to pretend everything was fine until it actually was." "You don't," her mother whispered. "Not anymore." The hours passed in a blur. She opened letters Nolan had left on her counter, apologies scribbled in desperation, promising he didn't mean it, that it was a mistake, that they could work it out. She tossed them in the trash. The baby deserved peace, not poison, but the world kept knocking. That afternoon, Layla opened the door to a sharply dressed woman with a notepad and a CBS badge. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm from Voices of the Valley. Your story is touching millions. We'd love to give you the chance to speak, on your terms." Layla was stunned. "I didn't plan any of this." "That's why it matters," the woman said gently. "People are tired of staged stories. Yours is raw, real, and resonating with women everywhere." Layla hesitated. She hadn't even figured out how to feel, let alone speak publicly. But the thought of her voice reaching other women who were lied to, abandoned, pregnant, and terrified, made her wonder if maybe her shame could serve as someone else's torch. She nodded slowly. "Okay, but no makeup team, no dramatic music, just truth." The interview was filmed at a quiet cafe, with Layla speaking softly across a table, hands cradling a mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She talked about trust, about losing it, about walking down an aisle and choosing dignity over denial. She didn't cry until the very end, when she said, "I'm not broken. I'm just beginning. And so is my child." The video aired 2 nights later. It went viral. Comments poured in, strangers calling her brave, women thanking her for showing that strength didn't always look loud. Layla sat in silence as she watched the playback, not for vanity, but for affirmation. That was her, unedited, surviving. Meanwhile, Nolan tried to salvage his image, blaming the pressures of planning, painting himself as a confused groom under stress. But no one bought it, not after Layla's quiet dignity. Public opinion shifted like a tide, washing sympathy away from the man who cheated, and toward the woman who stood tall in white and walked away with a baby in her belly and fire in her soul. And far from the noise, in a quiet condo across town, the man from the bookstore watched it too. He didn't smile. He just nodded like he'd always known she wasn't the kind of woman who crumbled, only the kind who rises. The bookstore man's name was Cameron Rhodes, and he hadn't set foot in a church since his own wedding dissolved 6 years ago. A quiet man in finance, he preferred numbers to people, pages to parties, and shadows to stages. But something about Layla, her steadiness in the bookstore aisle, the way she held that pregnancy book like it was armor and map in one, had rooted itself in his chest. When her interview aired, he watched it from his kitchen, bowl of soup forgotten in his lap. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was viral, though she was. But because she had told the truth. And it didn't tremble. Cameron turned off the TV and stared at the floor for a long time. Then he got up, opened his desk drawer, and pulled out a note he'd written years ago. Some people show up in your life as echoes. Don't ignore them. He tucked it in his wallet. 2 days later, he returned to the bookstore and left a sealed envelope for Layla. Inside was a short note. If you ever want to read beside someone who won't interrupt or judge, I'll be here. See, it had no phone number, no pressure, just a quiet offering. Layla received it from the clerk the next morning, blinking in surprise. She reread it twice, heart folding in cautious warmth. She didn't know Cameron's last name, but she remembered the steadiness in his voice, the absence of pity. That night, she returned to the bookstore. He was there. Same aisle, same quiet suit. You always read finance books at 7 p.m.? She teased. He looked up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Only when I expect good company. She sat beside him on the old reading bench, exhaling slowly. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. But when she left, he walked her to the door and said, "If you ever need anything, even just a walk through quiet streets, I'm around." Layla nodded. I think I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, they became silent rituals in each other's lives. Coffee cups passed without fanfare. Notes exchanged in margins of borrowed books. They didn't touch, not yet. But their presence was a balm neither of them had realized they needed. Cameron never asked about Nolan, never poked at scars. He just stood near and reminded her, without saying it, that trust could still grow in unlikely soil. One day Layla brought him a book. Parenting. Solo, a graceful start. He raised an eyebrow. You sure this isn't for you? She grinned. Maybe I just want your financial advice on strollers. He chuckled. Then I'll need a spreadsheet. The laughter between them was still soft, still new, but it was real. Layla wasn't falling in love. Not yet. But she was falling back into life. And she wasn't alone. Cameron's sister noticed the change. You look peaceful, she said. Cameron just smiled. I met someone brave enough to walk out of her own wedding. His sister stared. And you're still single? For now, he said. But I'm not in a hurry. Some people deserve time. Layla, meanwhile, felt her baby kick that night as she watched the city lights flicker outside her window. And for the first time since the aisle, she whispered into the quiet. I'm glad I walked away. Outside, the wind carried that prayer into the dark, where it curled into the heart of a man already waiting. It was Layla who suggested dinner, not because she was ready, but because she wasn't afraid anymore. There's a new place down the street from the bookstore, she said one evening, slipping a note between the pages of Cameron's paperback. They do terrible lasagna. Thought we could suffer through it together. He smiled when he read it, and simply replied beneath, only if we can rate it on a spreadsheet afterward. So they met at 6 p.m., neither dressed up, neither calling it anything. Layla wore a soft blue sweater that hugged the shape of her growing belly, proud now, not hidden. Cameron wore his usual blazer and boots. "You came," she said. "You invited me," he replied. The restaurant was quiet, the kind of place with chipped wooden booths and candles that flickered like old secrets. Layla fidgeted for a moment, then blurted, "So, you're not married?" Cameron shook his head. "Divorced, 6 years ago. No kids, just books and regret." She blinked. "That's honest." "You started it," he said. "You showed the world that honesty doesn't break you." They talked through the salad course. Not about Nolan, not about the internet frenzy still buzzing around her, but about music and bookstores that smelled like dust and hope. Layla laughed for the first time in weeks. Really laughed, shoulders back, hand on her belly as if to include the baby in the joy. "You're kind," she said. "Kind people are rare." "So are brave ones," he said. "But I think they find each other." As the lasagna arrived, indeed overbaked and unforgivable, they both winced and agreed. 2 out of 10. "For the food," Cameron added quickly, "not the company." Afterward, he walked her home in silence, their steps matching like a pattern they hadn't practiced. At her door, he paused. "Layla, if you ever want more than shared dinners and book notes, I'd like to be part of your child's story, in whatever way you're ready for." Her throat caught. "Why?" "Because you don't need saving. But you deserve someone who doesn't walk away." She looked at him, really looked, and saw no rush, no agenda, just a man holding space where hurt used to live. She nodded slowly. "Then maybe we can keep walking, see where it leads." Cameron smiled. Page by page. Inside, Layla stood at her window after he left, hand resting on her belly. The child stirred, as if aware of the new rhythm growing around them. And down the street, Cameron glanced back once, not to see if she was watching, but to make sure this was real. He had once thought love was loud, dramatic, full of fire. But maybe it was this. 2 people scarred and steady, walking side by side toward a kind of quiet joy that didn't need to be named yet. The knock at her door came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Layla was sorting through old baby clothes sent by her cousin. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, her breath froze. Nolan stood there, polished suit, trimmed beard, the same smug confidence he wore at their wedding. But something about him looked forced now, like a man who'd just learned too late how badly he'd misjudged everything. "Layla," he said, eyeing her stomach. "We need to talk." She didn't invite him in. She stepped outside, pulled the door gently behind her. "Whatever it is, make it quick." "I saw you on TV," he said. "Everyone has. That whole thing, what was it? A stunt?" "It was the truth," she replied calmly. "Something you used to run from." "You embarrassed me." "No, Nolan. You embarrassed yourself the day you chose a bridesmaid over your bride." He flinched. "Listen, I've had time to think. Maybe we rushed into the divorce. Maybe—" "We didn't divorce," she cut in. "You filed, you signed, you ran." He swallowed. "And the baby?" She raised an eyebrow. "Now you care?" "Of course I care. He's mine, isn't he?" "She," Layla corrected. "And no, she's not. You know that." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "She's not biologically yours, Nolan. She's the product of one night, after you left, when I didn't even know I was pregnant until weeks later." His face contorted. "So you moved on that fast?" "No," she said evenly. "I broke down. I was human. I made mistakes. But unlike you, I didn't abandon anyone after." He took a step closer. "Look, we can make this work. The media buzz is good. We could write a book. Rebrand together. Single mom takes cheating husband back." Layla's face hardened. "You didn't come here for me. You came for attention." It's business, Layla. No, it's exploitation. Of me. Of my daughter behind her. The door opened slowly. Cameron stepped out, calm but firm. Is there a problem? Nolan scoffed. Who's this? The babysitter? Cameron met his gaze. The man who stayed. Nolan shook his head, laughing bitterly. This is insane. You're throwing away everything. Layla took Cameron's hand, lacing their fingers together. I'm building something honest. Nolan stared, a man who suddenly realized no one was buying his charm anymore. Then, without another word, he turned and walked down the steps. Layla exhaled hard, leaning into Cameron's shoulder. You okay? He asked. I will be, she whispered, because I finally said everything I should have said a year ago. They stood together in silence, while inside, a tiny pink blanket waited in a basket, and a future full of truth quietly unfolded. Layla had never planned to have a baby shower, especially not after everything that happened. No friends, no family who hadn't already taken sides, no sparkling games or silly balloons. But it was Cameron who noticed her pause outside the boutique that sold pastel decorations, her hand lingering too long on the glass display of tiny booties and "It's a girl" banners. We don't need a crowd, he said gently that evening, setting down 2 plates of her favorite lemon pasta. But we can still celebrate her. Layla looked at him, unsure. Just us? Us, and whoever shows up, he smiled. And so the idea was born. Not a baby shower, more like an open door. Cameron sent a discreet message to the bookstore mailing list. Layla posted a quiet invitation on her new blog. No games, no gifts, just tea, cookies, and a chair, if you want to sit with a woman who once lost everything and found peace inside a crib. The afternoon came with sunlight so warm it melted old grief. The bookstore closed for the day, its shelves pushed aside to make space. Cameron brewed chamomile, Layla wore a loose white dress, and in her hands she held a framed ultrasound picture like it was a story she finally wanted to read aloud. At first, no one came. The clock ticked. The cookies cooled. Layla tried not to cry. But then the door creaked open. An old woman entered with a jar of homemade jam. I read your blog, she said. You reminded me of my daughter. Then a teenage girl arrived, awkward and shy, carrying a single rose. Then a young couple from the neighborhood, and a quiet woman who had once been Layla's customer when she worked reception. One by one, they trickled in. Not friends, not family, but witnesses. And that's what Layla realized she needed most. Not gifts, not fanfare, just people who saw her. She read aloud a letter she had written to her unborn daughter, words about strength and shame, and how healing is not linear. Cameron watched from the corner, his eyes damp but proud. Near the end, a man stepped forward with a guitar and asked gently, "Can I sing something for her?" Layla nodded, and the room fell silent as a lullaby filled the walls. It wasn't about babies or hope or even motherhood. It was about survival. When it ended, Layla whispered, "I think she just kicked." The room laughed, clapped softly, and for the first time in months, Layla felt like she wasn't alone. Not a single person there had seen her wedding. None had been at the betrayal. But they showed up for this, her rebirth. And that was enough. 2 weeks after the shower, Layla received a thick manila envelope with no return address. She almost tossed it aside, thinking it was another legal notice or forgotten bill, but something made her open it. Inside was a folded letter on old stationery, a black and white photo of a man holding a newborn, and a check. Her fingers trembled. She sat down slowly and unfolded the letter. It began, "My name is Everett Langston. I don't expect you to know me, but I knew your husband before he was your husband." Layla's breath hitched. Everett explained that he had once been Nolan's mentor, a venture capitalist who had given Nolan his first break. But more importantly, he had been Nolan's friend, and had watched from afar as Nolan spiraled into arrogance, selfishness, and scandal. "The day you were left at the altar, I was watching on a live stream," the letter read. "I saw your face, and I couldn't unsee it, not because of your pain, but because of your grace." He went on to say that for months he'd followed her quiet rise, her blog, her bookstore appearances, her strength that didn't demand attention. He had lost his own daughter 10 years ago, he wrote, in childbirth. She was pregnant, abandoned, too ashamed to ask for help. She didn't make it. I've lived with that silence ever since. Layla's eyes blurred as the words burned into her. Everett had set up a foundation in his daughter's name, and had recently decided to gift a grant, not to a business, not to a project, but to a person. A woman who had survived public cruelty with private dignity. "If you accept, this check is yours. No strings, no publicity. Use it to build your child's future. Or simply catch your breath." Layla turned the check over. $250,000. The room tilted. She sat there, stunned, until Cameron came home and found her still holding the paper, her eyes wide, her lips moving but no sound. He took the letter, read it silently, then knelt in front of her. "You were seen," he whispered. "Really seen." For days, she debated what to do. Accepting the money felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she deserved. But when she visited the local shelter the following week, saw the single mothers sleeping in cars and the babies without bottles, her decision became clear. Layla didn't just accept the money, she matched it with her own time and voice. She launched a fund for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. She named it the Second Vow Project. And in the press release, she wrote one line that silenced critics and skeptics alike. "He left me before the vows, but motherhood gave me a promise that no man could break." The day Layla went into labor, the sky broke open with spring rain, soft and steady like the kind that cleans rather than destroys. Cameron drove her to the birthing center, calm but quietly panicked, reciting all the things she already knew: her breathing rhythm, the overnight bag, the playlist she had made filled with lullabies and instrumental piano. As contractions gripped her, Layla clutched his hand and whispered, "You don't have to stay if it's too much." He looked at her, stunned. "Layla, I didn't come this far just to watch from the hallway." Hours passed, and the pain came in waves that nearly buckled her. But in between, she kept thinking of all the places she had been broken. On the wedding aisle, in the public eye, in the arms of a man who never deserved her, and how none of that could match the courage it took to push through this moment. Just before dawn, her daughter arrived with a cry that shattered the silence like glass. Bright, alive, furious at the cold. They named her Ivy, after a plant that grows through brick, reaching light even when buried. Layla held her, skin to skin, and wept. Not from pain, but because for the first time in years, she felt whole. Not healed, not fixed, just whole. The nurses asked about the father for the birth certificate. Cameron waited outside the room, not wanting to presume. But Layla waved them in. "He's here," she said. "He's the reason she came into this world with love." Cameron's eyes filled as he stepped forward, signing the form with care. Later that week, as the news of the Second Vow Project spread, picked up by parenting blogs and human interest reporters, one particular video began to go viral. It was Layla, holding Ivy at the bookstore's reopening event, reading a children's story she'd written called The Girl with Two Beginnings. In it, a girl is left behind at a wedding, finds a stranger with kind eyes, and learns that love doesn't always come in the order we expect, but it always arrives in time. People from across the country began sending letters. Some sent gifts, some shared stories. One woman wrote, "My fiancé left me when I got cancer, but your story gave me the courage to walk into chemo wearing white." Layla didn't respond to every message, but she read every single one. She kept them in a box labeled "Promises That Weren't Broken." And on Ivy's first birthday, as Cameron lifted the toddler high into the air under a banner that read, "1 year of light," Layla looked at the two of them, one by blood, one by bond, and knew this was her vow. Not the one she never got to say on that ruined wedding day, but the one she lived out every morning now. To choose softness over shame, to honor the quiet men, and to teach her daughter that the best beginnings often come after the worst endings. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on General Common Tales. If you had seen her at the altar that day, would you have walked her home? Tell us in the comments.